Welcome to the 468th of the COVID calls. This is a daily discussion of the COVID-19 pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. I'm coming to you live from Daejeon, South Korea. Today, I welcome my stepmother, Harriet Knowles, and my mother-in-law, Susan Merling, to talk about their lives during the pandemic. Just a reminder, you can catch COVID Calls live on Twitter and on the COVID Calls YouTube channel. You can hear COVID Calls anytime, recorded as podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or anywhere you get podcasts. You can also keep up with COVID Calls via Twitter using the handle @USOFDisaster or @COVID Calls. Please help spread the word and send suggestions for future guests and future topics. And as always, please feel free to suggest yourself as a future guest. As of March 13th, 2022, according to the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center, 6,042,278 people around the world have died of COVID-19. In the United States, 967,552 people have lost their lives to the disease. I've been reading an obituary or a story of advocacy for those impacted by the pandemic. I'd like to continue that reading now. This is the obituary of Natalia A. Feldman. Natalia A. Feldman of Brighton, Massachusetts, passed away on June 15th, 2020 at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. Natalia was born in Latvia to Andres Galins and Herta Sindelgalina 91 years ago. In 1955, she married her husband, Josef Feldman, who preceded her in passing in 1984. She was also preceded in death by her parents and brother. Natalia had an extraordinary life. At the age of 16, in the German-occupied Lipia, she was arrested by Nazis for just not carrying the required documents and was incredibly lucky to escape from the prison when it was destroyed by Soviet bombs. At the age of 21, she was arrested by the KGB simply for being honest and refusing to follow their orders. She was sentenced to 13 years of hard labor in a gulag and served 5 of those. She was dying of hunger and overwhelming work when Josef Feldman, also a gulag prisoner, saw her, fell in love at first sight, and managed to save her. They both were freed only thanks to Stalin's timely death, but still had to live in exile for 4 years after the camp. They got married and set up their first home in a tiny room converted from a stable. In her 60s, already widowed, Natalia followed her children to help them survive 2 immigrations, and in her 80s, she volunteered as a foster grandmother in a synagogue kindergarten, the Shello House in Brighton. Her luminous and loving presence will be deeply missed by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchild. With all sadness that Natalia had to experience in her life, she was a very wise and happy soul, ever curious, sharp, lively, and kind. And that is how she will be remembered by all who knew her. Private graveside service was held June 19th, 2020, and the family asked at that time that in lieu of flowers, people consider making a donation to the Wounded Warrior Project, as Natalia had been doing for many years. The obituary of Natalia A. Feldman, who died June 15th, 2020. And we're lucky also to have a testimonial from Natalia's granddaughter, Jenny, who's the daughter of Veronica and the mother of Harry, and I'm going to share with you what she wrote about her grandmother. Early on June 15th, my Oma passed away from acute respiratory distress due to COVID-19. She was 92 and she fought for a month. She died peacefully. It's hard to describe such an enormous loss. She was and is a luminous soul, despite the dark things she had seen in her long life. An incredible survivor and a fighter. At age 21, she was arrested in Latvia, where she was born, and brought to a Siberian labor camp. She met my grandfather there, and they wrote letters to each other in German, their one common language. When they were both released in the mid-1950s, they hitched a ride with a farm truck to the nearest city hall, got stuck in the rain, and after pushing the truck out of the mud, managed to get a marriage license. They raised two little children in a converted stable with very little resources, social, material, or political. They were survivors. She was a survivor. I grew up knowing this about her, though she rarely spoke about these years, which must have been terribly full of fear and uncertainty. The life of Natalia A. Feldman. Okay, I'd like to turn to the conversation for today. This is one I've really been looking forward to a great deal. Let me introduce my guests to you. Harriet Knowles is a native Texan, having been born and raised in West Texas in the town of Midland. She had a unique experience in her high school years in that her father was her school principal. Harriet attended Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas, and continued her education at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Dallas, where she obtained a physical therapy degree. She also earned a master's in behavior science from University of Texas Permian. She worked as a pediatric physical therapist in Midland. Harriet was in the workforce in physical therapy, pediatric related jobs, and worked for the Austin Independent School District as a physical therapist for her last 19 years before retirement. She lived in Georgetown, Texas, in the Sun City community with her husband, Steve, and enjoys her time loving on her grandchildren, of which she has 7, traveling and reading. She's also taking care of her mother, who lives with them there. My second guest is Susan Merling. Susan is a retired technology educator. She graduated from Tufts University as an English major, and then also attended graduate school at Manhattanville College, where she studied educational psychology, and Teachers College of Columbia University, where she studied communications, computing, and technology. She was a teacher in Ovid, New York, Scarsdale, and Houston in the Spring Branch district. And after technology moved into education, she taught the basics of computer literacy and emerging technologies to kids in elementary and middle school. She supported teachers and administrators in integrating technology into their lives and careers. After retirement, she babysat for her first grandchild, who also happens to be my son, then helped a Section 8 housing unit set up and use their computer room. She also volunteered at a senior day center in Boston before the pandemic. Since 2013, she's been a volunteer on the board and executive committee of a Cambridge nonprofit choral organization. She's the proud parent of 2 successful professional women and a grateful grandparent of 4 amazing grandchildren, ages 8 to 13. Susan Merling and Harriet Knowles, thank you so much for joining me on COVID Calls today. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Let me start the way I generally do, find out where you're calling from and how the pandemic situation is looking there. Harriet, let me start with you on that.
Okay. Georgetown, Texas. We are in a stage 2. Things are doing really well right now. So getting out and about better.
What does that look like in daily life there, Harriet? When you go to the drugstore, or you go out shopping to a restaurant, people are wearing masks. Is it mixed picture? Nobody's wearing masks?
It's still mixed. I actually went to our neighborhood drugstore, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't put my mask on. It's not very crowded at all, and the people that were in the checkout, they had their mask on, but and I felt okay. We're doing well here. I went back to church for the first time in 2 years.
Wow.
Last on Ash Wednesday, and didn't mask there. I've had a few gatherings with people in homes.
What a change.
It's a big change.
What a change. Susan, same question to you.
Yes, I am in Massachusetts. At this moment, I'm in Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is just up the coast a bit from Boston. And Massachusetts has gone mask-free. The mask mandate ended in the state within the last few weeks, the mayor of Boston, who's a new mayor, decided to extend the mask mandate in the city. And now it will officially end on April 1st. Although we have mask mandates in public transportation. When you take the subway or the bus, masks are required. And shop owners and restaurant owners have the option to ask that you wear a mask. And we have, my husband and I have kept our masks on most of the time now. And we have a daughter hanging out with us for a while, and she has a public health background. So we have followed some advice she's given us. But during the pandemic, we just, wore masks and socially distanced the whole time. So what I think happens now is looking at the statistics. I just printed out our statistics, and the vaccination rates are pretty good in Essex County, where I am now. The vaccination rate for all ages is 75%, and for 65 and up, which includes me, it's 92%, and it's almost similar for the state of Massachusetts and similar for Boston. I don't understand why they give case numbers, because I think, I don't know about where you two are, but if you test positive and you feel kind of okay, you don't have to report it. So reported cases and reported deaths probably count, but reported cases seem somewhat meaningless.
It's really amazing to hear that the mask mandate is coming down in Boston in April. I mean, it really, other than I think probably Hawaii, I think Massachusetts has had some of the most restrictive, or we could frame it differently, say most progressive, life-saving policies around masks and around gatherings. So it really is quite something. I've talked to a lot of guests recently about this moment in time as one in the United States, where there's a bit of people want to, of course, rejoin society and the things they were doing in February of 2020. But after Delta and Omicron, there is a hesitation there. There's a sort of a feeling like we've seen this exuberance before and a little concerned about getting back to it. I don't know if that registers in any of your conversations with people, Susan, that hesitation.
Oh, I think so. I mean, we have people, I have a friend who says I'm going to be the last one to take my mask off. And I think, I could be right along there with her. I mean, I never felt that masks were such a terrible bother or an impingement on my freedoms. But it just seemed logical, and there's still things we don't know. And now the B12 is around in Massachusetts. B12, B2, the later variant.
The next variant, yeah.
So I think we'll see what happens. I mean, they started loosening everything up though. I don't know about where you are, Harriet, but right after Christmas break, they cut the mask mandate for schools, which sounded kind of strange to me. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Harriet, let me just bring you back in. And actually, I'm just going to take this moment here to remind folks that you're listening to COVID Calls. And I'm talking to Susan Merling today, who's my mother-in-law, and Harriet Knowles, who's my stepmother, although I don't really like that term. She's my mother. I just want to thank you both here and just take a moment, because we were chatting a bit beforehand. You've both been most consistent in reaching out to me and giving me some positive feedback on COVID calls. and it means a lot. This project has been one that family and friends have sacrificed a lot to help me do this, and it's just want to take a second to express my gratitude to both of you, my love for actually not just saying, "Hey, good job," but like really listening and like I can tell people who listen like the first 5 minutes, and then I know the people who like listen to the whole episode, because you often point out things that are like, that's like in the 45th minute of the episode. Like they really listened to that. So thanks a lot.
We're retired. What can I say? And we are your big fans.
This is a perfect audience.
Absolutely. For many years.
I've been, as you both know, I asked guests to share a personal memory this time, the impossible question, but I wanted to ask both of you as well. Harriet, is there a memory of this time that really stands for you and what COVID has meant?
Yeah, I love the question because it helped me go back in time. And as you know, because you came and visited, my dad died during COVID. It was March 28th of 2020. And we were some of the first people that had to have those funerals with only, I don't know if it was 10 or 12 people that were allowed to be there, including the minister and whoever sang. So we had to do that. My dad had had a stroke and had been at home with my mom and 24/7 caregivers there at the house. And then I actually had esophageal cancer, and that's what he died from. So we were right at the beginning of COVID. He had caregivers that were coming in. They were, spraying Lysol down, wiping everything down if they'd gone out to the grocery store. Hospice workers were all of a sudden putting on masks and gloves when they came in. Less people were coming. Ministers were not coming into the home. Just a lot of things were happening. And thank goodness he did not last much longer. But the funeral was really unexpected. I mean, we didn't even know that this was going to be how it was going to be until we got there, and had to have it outside in a pavilion. My dad has 5 living brothers and sisters. They were able to be there. My husband, myself, my brother, his wife, my mother, and that was it. But of course, there were cars all around, and they had come. And then a few days later, the biggest memory was packing up my mother and going, "You can't stay here. You'll have to come home with us and live with us. There's no way that we're going to get caregivers for you to do this." So that was very, very stressful, and it was very stressful on her. And just the whole trip is a huge memory for me, Scott, because things were closed down. I think that was the week that everything was, I mean, we weren't even supposed to be traveling, and we had to, but places were closed. We had a hard time finding any place open to get a takeout lunch, going to the restroom. I mean, I didn't know what to do. So I was covering my mouth. Masks weren't there. I was covering my mouth with a Kleenex. I was putting on gloves.
Yeah.
Was scared to death to get out of the car to go to the restroom. I was just freaked out when I went to the restroom, because it was dirty anyway, and that's where COVID must be. So I can remember that. It was a long 6-7 hour drive, and and it was cold and it was uncomfortable. So that's my memory.
Thank you for sharing that. And it was a hard time, and there's something about the way you describe that too. That Garland was a popular guy,
Mm-hmm.
big family, a lot of friends, and that funeral, which I tried to watch remotely,
Mm-hmm.
and it would have been hard under the best of circumstances, but it's just hard because the sense of like there should be a big group of people there, like telling stories about Garland. But you pointed out that there were people in the cars. I mean, that's the sort of modification people did make very quickly. They're like, we're going to be there, but we might have to be alone in our
Right.
cars.
Right. and waved, you know.
Yeah. But you made it. I mean, you brought your mother back to Georgetown.
Yeah.
Susan, let me ask you the same question. A memory that stands in for this time. Thank you, Harriet.
Yes, I have several. One is that at the very beginning of the pandemic, or just before the pandemic, I have a family member who lived in Houston at the time, now lives in Kerrville, but she got seriously ill, and I was ready to fly there. She was ill the end of February, and I was going to go and help her get into the facility that she needed. And then the pandemic was upon us, or was coming, and there was a big conference at a hotel near us in Boston, and and it was already in the neighborhood school around the corner. So I called my doctor's office about the 25th of February and said, I hear there's this virus, but I really need to fly to Texas. And I left the message, and then my doctor's nurse or assistant called me back and said, "Oh, Susan, you can definitely go. It's going to be okay, and you're going to be in airports. And airports," and this was a direct quote, "are very safe places." So I made a tentative reservation to leave on March 4th. Well, by March 4th, it wasn't happening. This person has great friends and colleagues who helped her through it. But I had planned to be there. And the second one is of Natalia, who from the obituary that you read. She and I were friends for close to 10 years. And I remember that the last time I met up with her was Monday, March 9th. And I think it was March 9th. She did, if you got that from the obituary, she was a feisty, spirited woman who had been through a whole lot, but always had an amazingly wonderful outlook on things. And she kept up with the news, and she said to me, "Oh, you know what the young people are doing? Because in my building there are some 20-something girls who came from Asia, and they do this little foot tap thing. Do you remember the foot tap at the beginning of that was a greeting at the beginning of the pandemic?" So we laughed about that, and I think when I left her, she was in a senior adult day center. And I think when I left, we had a bit of a hug, but, and as it turned out, she had a minor fall, really, outside her apartment building where she went out for a walk every day, walked around the lake near her apartment complex, and she fell down, and she did fall occasionally. And she had a walker, but of course, people came running because they saw this older woman lying on the ground and picked her up, and they rushed her off to the hospital. And then the hospital said, "Oh, well, you fell because you have, some heart issues." Well, she knew she had heart issues. But then somebody there said, "Oh, you need a pacemaker right away." They did the pacemaker surgery. And this was in May. And she and her daughter and son-in-law all got COVID from that hospital visit. So that was, that was really bittersweet. And then the other thing I remember is there's a group of shanty singers here in Gloucester, and one day, sort of spontaneously, there was an email that went around, and everybody met down on the beach and sang together, distanced. And I don't even know, I guess there were masks then in April or so. But anyway, and that was a fun memory.
For people who may not know, Gloucester, Massachusetts sea shanty singing scene is real. And so that's actually that was quite a gathering. I wish I could have been there for that. That's pretty amazing that you did that. Thanks for sharing about Natalia too, and sharing the obituary. She had a cinematic life.
Just amazing. And you would never have known. I mean, she sat me down and told me about the second time we had met, because I was there at the senior center doing English conversation for Russians in their 80s and 90s who wanted to improve their English. But she told me her life story. But she was just such a positive person, very wise, very funny, and we had a great time together.
So just a quick reminder, you're listening to COVID Calls. I'm talking to Susan Merling and Harriet Knowles today. I want to know how you had to modify your lives, particularly early in the pandemic. We've been talking about this, Harriet, you were talking about you had to go through this modification in the middle of this huge life change moment.
Mhm.
What did you have to do to keep yourself and the household safe early on? And how did it sort of like change your life or restructure your life? I'm thinking early in the pandemic. What was the lockdown like, for example?
Um, well, we stayed home. You know, I cooked a lot more dinners. Just because I was always going out and being with people or at least having a lunch and things like that. So no, we took it very seriously. Our age, my mother's age, and health problems. So we took it very seriously and just stayed put. We didn't see anybody else. We had 3 in the house, so we had company. At least I wasn't by myself like a lot of my friends were. Um, we we had a little center, with the wipes and everything you can imagine was right there in front of us. We cleaned, we kept things clean anytime we did go out, which was not very often at all. So yeah, I think that's what we did. We listened. I listened to a lot of your calls. I talked to my cousin who's in public health. She works at a clinic in
Mhm.
Waco. I would call her because she kind of knew what was going on through the hospital and the clinics that she was part of and the doctors, and just listened to her and got a lot of my information from her and just kind of did what she said, which was, don't be afraid, but respect the virus. It's a virus and it needs a host. So.
How did you manage doctor visits for your mom during that time? That's something people really struggled with.
Well, finally, we did a lot of telecommunication, which
Oh,
was
okay.
ex wonderfully helpful, but my mother was in really bad shape after taking care of my dad for so long. I really didn't know what was gonna happen with her, and so we did do a lot of, we did some minor emergency clinics, and we did go to the doctor, and I hated it, um, but we would just mask up and, have to go, which got easier, but, we had to take care of her health too.
Susan, I have a little bit of an insight of how you manage things because you and John turned your home into a life raft for my family during the summer of 2020. So I remember your mask station right by the door. And like Harriet described, the sort of, I guess every household now has its like cleaning supply area. But
Hand
we didn't,
sanitizer.
yeah, we didn't make it there till that summer. What was the lockdown phase like for you?
Um, well, we did also take it very seriously. We got one of your questions was, how did we get our information? Um, uh, Not from Facebook, never from Facebook, but we used the New York Times coronavirus tracker, and we used the CDC website, and we used some of the people who um, we learned about from you or through COVID calls. We followed and I still follow Dr. Peter Hotez a lot, and the CDC. And when the advice changed and people threw up their hands and said, well, they don't know what to tell us, we just stuck with the scientists. We did not swallow bleach or that stuff that people give to their pets for worms.
Good.
Ivermectin. We weren't into that. But we we took it seriously. John went. It turned out I am married to someone who loves to go out briefly every day to the supermarket, and I noticed that before the pandemic, he was like, he'd always go out and do food shopping almost every day. So he started going out at for the 6 o'clock opening of a supermarket near us, and he was back before 7. We had we kind of stayed in Gloucester for most of the time, although we went back to Boston briefly to check the mail and make sure the condo was still there. But we had a very very good. We had we do have lovely neighbors here in Gloucester, and so we did things like somebody had a driveway concert several times actually. They have a deck out over the house and a big green lawn. And initially, for the first one, everybody just brought their own chairs and sat in their driveway. And that was like May of 2020. And of course, it was rainy or whatever and cold, but but we did it anyway. Somebody else has a fire pit, so we sat spread out around that the weekend after Election Day, and we did. We also got very into Zooming. And a lot of people say, "Oh, I hate Zoom. I hate Zoom. I hate Zoom," but we really thought it became very useful for us. We both sing in choral groups, and those met on Zoom with various levels of success. And I have a great conductor who found all sorts of technologies that she could implement for us. So there were 130 people in the group initially. And now we're down to about 90 to 100 who have stuck with it, some on Zoom, some in person. So, we definitely tried to keep our own interests going. And we definitely, we had one neighbor who, we had a neighborhood email network on, where to find toilet paper. Now it's, most recently it was where to find COVID tests. But
Sure.
I remember we had a neighbor down the street who said that they were running low on toilet paper. So the next morning when John was going out at 6 o'clock, I said, stop at these people's house and get an extra package of toilet paper, because we were low at that point too, and leave it for them. So John went and rang their doorbell and left it on their back stoop at like 6:20 in the morning. And then a week later, I said, has anybody seen any basil? And those same neighbors, in fact, showed up at our front stoop with 2 basil plants.
I'm really impressed that you managed to keep the choral group going. And I've talked with performers on COVID calls about, like the most dangerous thing you could do at that time, get together with a group of people and sing, but you need to have that proximity to get the timing right and to do it right. And you managed somehow to keep that going. I think it's really, really impressive.
At one point she had a piece of software where everybody recorded themselves. I mean, you learned the music in our sessions, in our Zoom sessions, and from audio files. And then we each recorded our own part alone, which was, a little scary. And then she put them all together to make a choral sound. We did not do the virtual choir because that was really too expensive and too extensive with the technology we had. But yeah, we did it, and some people weren't interested, um, and some just kind of dropped up. But most people, a good number of people stuck around. So we did that, and that kept us going too. Things to do. I love to take. We've taken a lot of online courses and things like that. And then that summer visit was just wonderful. This house, was filled with cardboard tubes because one of your children was into making things from paper towel tubes but it was easy to provide those supplies, big, huge pieces of paper
Yeah.
and paints and crayons and scissors. So that was really lovely for us.
That was Mercer's paper weapons phase.
It was, in fact, yes,
he's returned to that recently, by the way.
yes, and
Yeah.
yes, and to illustrate what good cleaners we are not. I reached under this couch that I'm sitting on for something about 6 months ago. Something had rolled under the couch, and I reached under with a broom, and out came a big, long paper weapon.
So that's where that was.
Yeah, no, you would never have missed
That's
it.
funny. Harriet, let me, I want to kind of talk with you about the same thing, like how you kept your sociability going, particularly. I was Sun City is a place where it is a community by definition. So how did you, Susan was talking about the email chain, where to find what, and people leave it at your front door. Do you have something similar to that at Sun City? How did you all stay connected?
Oh yeah, we've got all that. There's a Sun City Facebook page, and that we were very good about telling each other how to find vaccinations. That was huge, trying to figure that all out. And that was not an easy time, and we were nervous, and we were looking, and neighbors helped each other, and I found some, and lots of my neighbors got hooked up with that. But we did that, and I found a lot of online things too, like Susan did, and I took a soul collage and became the facilitator for that.
What is that?
That is, it kind of combined my interest in spirituality and psychology and the fine arts, and it's a creative art. You make collages, and I think I've sent you some of those collages, and it was just very good to get in touch with inner things that were going on in your life, and you do it through art. A lot of art therapists take these classes and courses and become facilitators, and a lot of psychologists do also. And so I found one that was online, and I thought, I'm going to do this. And now I have a community of people all over the world. We meet. I've met with those people once a week for almost a year now. So I love Zoom too, Susan. I think it's just a wonderful opportunity. I got a spiritual director that lives in Philadelphia, and talk to her once a week. It just opened up my world. I'm Sun City is very social, but a lot of the things you can't do, and a lot of the things, being an introvert, I never really liked doing anyway. I didn't go to dances and things like that, but we've stayed busy, watched way too much TV, and we laughed about getting to the end of Netflix. Well, I feel like we just about did, but but a lot of learning was going on, a lot of good things, and a lot of closeness to relatives and to babies and
Yeah, and I want to ask about that in a second. But you were kind enough to share some of that collage work you did. I wanted to just ask you about that a little more. Were you able to process some of the anxiety of the pandemic through that?
Absolutely. It was just a real lifeline to me. doing that. It's a creative process, and you go through magazines and you look at images that just kind of speak to you, and you don't know why. You're not intentionally looking at them, and then you get an 8x10, 8x5 card, and you just start putting things on. And then there's a process of it where you read the card, and it is like, I am one who, kind of a gestalt type therapy. And it was just amazing. I made so many cards. And one of the things during this time, you really come to terms with death, your own death, friends' deaths, my father's death. I was going through a grieving process. All those things come out through the arts and the artwork. And it was a great processing. And then listening to other people on Zoom and share their cards and their readings and things like that. So it was a good process.
Let me stay with you for a second, Harriet, because so Central Texas, and anybody who listens to COVID calls knows I talk about Texas a lot. And most of my family, not all, I do have family in Massachusetts and North Carolina and California, but the center of gravity of my family, aside from my nuclear family, is in Texas, in a few counties in Central Texas. So whenever I think of you all, I think of your backyard. Honestly, I think of your kitchen table. I think of obviously the places where I went to college and that those memories, but also just the tight network of family that's there. And so with a call or a text message, you could assemble people. I mean, it's just sort of like, I guess, your prerogative as mom and grandmother too. It's like we're assembling, and people come and for meals and birthday parties and everything else, and you're a genius at that. And then all of a sudden now it's like, well, we can't do that now. And so I'm curious how you cope with that. And we were talking earlier in the pandemic, but that's quite something, to have this tight network of family that you're used to being in each other's presence,
and
then to have to cope with this pandemic.
Yeah. Well, we continue to listen to what they said. We had some members that never got out of their house either. Their children were in the house with them, and we did form a little bubble. So there were people that we got to see. And then, of course, later on, there was testing. So we would get tested before we'd see each other, or we'd, make sure we didn't see anybody for 14 days before we saw each other. So we did have some gatherings. It wasn't like nothing ever happened or we never saw those people. And babies were born during that time, and I went down and stayed with the mothers. And so.
And you had to develop a kind of a protocol on kind of building a pod, like a family pod, right? I've talked to other people about this too. And like, how did you prepare for that? Is some period of isolation before you all get together, or every family seemed to have done something a little different around this?
Yeah, we did. But like I said, we just kind of see what was going on and what the CDC was saying, and we pretty much tried to follow it. And we didn't get together with the people that were going back to work and had to be with a lot of people. But we have 2 teachers in the family. They were doing it all remotely, so they were home. So it was.
Susan, let me ask you the same question. You were talking about it a moment ago about finding the paper weapons under your couch. So we did a bit of that too, like finding a way to retrieve some sort of family sociability. And just like I was talking about with Harriet, I mean, your house also it was a life raft for us. You've got a beach close by. It's gorgeous, but it's still had to find ways to stay connected with family. How did you approach that?
Well, I think Zoom and FaceTime have been great for us. And we, with my cousin and with friends, we also have been having either a Zoom coffee chat or a Zoom cocktail parties, which is great fun. We just get in touch with someone who's someplace else in the world, and so like instead of emailing people, we would call them up and say, I'm going to send you a Zoom link, and that was really fun for family and friends. And you always learn something new with every new event. I found with all 4 grandchildren, the boys and the girls, you do much better having a Zoom or a FaceTime chat one-on-one. If it's both boys or both girls, someone always feels cheated, or someone gets bored and leaves. So, it's better if you have a chat, even if it's my husband and me and one of the boys or one of the girls, and then we do it a different time, and then they can call, when the girls especially can call whenever they want, and their mother lets them use her phone. But I think that made that helped because we also, Harriet and I have both worked in education, so it's no news to say, you don't, say, hello, what's going on? Tell me, how is school? How, if you can find something to talk about that they want to talk about. And some of them, the kids, our grandchildren are are between 8 and 13. So a couple of them, the older 2 especially, will initiate something, and your older child and the older child in North Carolina will say, so how are you 2 doing? So what are you doing? And which is really quite charming, and gives you the idea that they're growing up. But also those 2, one is a teenager, and one in North Carolina is a very close to teenage. And so, they're really growing up. It happens with any age, but, I feel like, oh my gosh. And one of them talks about being in puberty. Thank you very much. Or getting close to puberty. And so, we talk about books, and what they want for Christmas, because so yeah. So we really, we have to make the, it takes an effort sometimes. Back in the beginning, we also did we did chess.com. I couldn't keep up with your older child, but John sometimes could, and then your younger child learned to beat me too. So, but we also did we did one of those art classes, like how to draw a grasshopper, and we both did it, and that was one of your children, and I'm a terrible artist, and it's just not my thing. My sister has all the art talent in our family, but your little guy was just so encouraging. Oh no, Graham, that's great. Oh no, it looks really good.
Yeah.
So,
he does the same for me, and I'm a terrible artist, and he makes me feel like I can do something. Yeah, I'm really glad you're sharing these memories, because in pandemic years, it's been like 20 years since then. And I had forgotten, I guess, temporarily, all of those art classes that went online, and every game that I guess was already online, but we hadn't thought to look for it, was there. And there was that with Netflix, that you could watch movies simultaneously or watch TV shows simultaneously with people. I did that. We did that once, Harriet, with some of my brothers and sisters, and Dad may have been on that. So we found a way to continue to have some sociability, and not just like intense sociability like Christmas, but like just the less intense sociability, like let's just have a chat, which we were not so used to doing, I don't think, on a regular basis with Zoom. But Susan, you're describing it, and I remember it that way too. Like, it's just another skill that we picked up if you want to stay connected with people. Let me just take a second to remind folks you're listening to COVID Calls. I'm talking to Susan Merling and Harriet Knowles today. I wanted to get to, if we have time, another couple of topics. Susan, you and I over the years have continually talked about politics. It's not unknown for us to quote some Rachel Maddow to back and forth to each other once in a while. I didn't really want to talk about Donald Trump, but what I did want to ask you about is just sort of like your sense of this time in American life and how you think maybe it's changed America or not. Do you think this is a moment in time? There's just so much stress and just a bad convergence of political things, and we'll move through it. I appreciate your perspective on this.
Sure. I'm glad you asked the question. Things have changed in the United States. And I think this leaning toward fierce individualism, meism, sort of anarchy, and we have, we've had, huge anti-vax organization here too, and people wanting their own individual freedom rather than doing things for the public good. So I think that was maybe not so helpful, but I can't just blame that on the pandemic. There were the politics involved. I noticed quite early on, I mean, I know when you're 74, you should think of yourself as old, but suddenly I was lumped in a category of people over 65 who were considered elderly. And then I started noticing this ageism in TV ads. And that, there was there was always like the stupid grandparent who lost his clothing out of the dryer or something. And I thought, I'm really considered elderly now. And that's like, people say, yes, of course. But I think the whole individual freedoms organizations, which is basically I can do whatever I want. And I always thought of that as coming from these communities someplace out in the mountains where people, don't need to follow the rules because they are they're free and they do what they want to do and they don't care about the government or anybody's rules. Of course, they still take advantage of, I'm sure, of hospitals and roadways and electricity and water systems and so on. So I think it the impact can be considered possibly, negative in some ways, but there are, and we certainly had in Massachusetts, we had the Holyoke Soldiers Home that had 76 residents die. And that had to do with mismanagement. But now, even in some facilities, people who work there don't want to wear masks. And so there are still some dangers. I know of people who have had serious surgeries postponed. I mean, everybody canceled. I mean, we canceled all sorts of doctor's appointments that we didn't think were necessary. But I know several people who had surgeries, important surgeries, that had to be postponed because hospitals were not staffed enough, and they didn't have enough beds. But on the other hand, there in some places there is a bigger sense of community now. I feel like I'm much more involved with the community in our neighborhood. We have book clubs and we have these email chains, and I also think that one of the things that that maybe was not caused by the pandemic, but the whole Black Lives Matter issue really just came up during the pandemic. And I know, that was political, and it, I'm trying to relate in my head how how it connects with COVID. But I think that that's been great for us to, kind of be aware suddenly. Those of us who've grown up in, with all of these, critical cultural issues, and we just lived with them. And then suddenly things were turned around. And I read, a number of books that were related to the cultural history. So I think, but that was a really good thing that came out of that time period.
I agree. And there was so much, so much good has come out, and that is one of the biggest. And just, I think it's unearthed so much that has been going on, and now we've had some time to reflect on it, and the anger around things, and yeah, I'd be angry too if I was on the front lines and being ignored. And I'm glad people are getting paid more now. I just, and we look at what's going on in the world now with Ukraine, and just, it could happen. It happens when things get so out of control. And so I think this is like everything. It's a good time to see what good has come out of it also.
Harriet, let me just, since you both were connecting there for a second about the Black Lives Matter movement, which is, I think the way you said it, Susan, is important. It's hard to know exactly the causality of how that's connected with, I mean, obviously there's the murders that happened, but the violence that kicked it off. But there's something also about this pandemic time. They exist together, I think, in an important way. And, Harriet, you're a person who, I think you've often, through your church communities, you've been involved at real serious attempts at racial understanding, cross-racial understanding, and reckoning and redemption.
Yeah, we tried to plant a church and have it interracial, and it thrived for a while, and over in East Austin. And we've done a lot, and I've gone to workshops and retreats, and way before the pandemic. So it's been brewing for a long time.
Well, what I wanted to ask you, and I have been asking people this recently, is about sort of going forward in America, and what do we need to give to each other? What kind of structures do we need? What venues do we need to try to not just get past the pandemic, but there's the social part of the fracturing that was revealed by the pandemic that I just really feel like, and I'm in the editorial box here, but hopefully you're comfortable with it. We need ways to come back together in the United States. We need ways to find redemption. We have to learn to listen to each other. And you've been active in that kind of work for a long time. I mean, what do you think we need to do coming out of this pandemic to find each other again and have a country that can actually function? Not that we all have to agree on everything, but not to be yelling and screaming at each other all the time.
Right. Well, in the work that I'm doing right now, it is learning how to listen to one another, really listening. And I guess if we just keep doing that one-on-one with people, and teach our children how to do it, and be good examples of people that care about each other, one another, and put the well-being of another one before you think of only of yourself. That's just me in a microcosmic of just my little world, and that's what I can do. Plus, plug into places that are doing good works, that are doing this throughout the world, and in your community and into the United States, and are fighting for justice, and find those places that are doing things, and support them financially, support them politically with the way you vote, whatever you can do.
Susan, I wanted to ask you that same question.
Yes, I really agree with everything that Harriet has said. I think talking with people is sometimes hard if you feel like you're on opposite ends of the spectrum. And I tend to, for example, I tend to be tolerant of almost everybody except anti-vaxxers. And I just, I think public health is so important. And I don't know, really how to speak to people who claim that vaccines cause autism and all that other stuff. And I did read Peter Hotez's book on that, because he has a daughter who's autistic. And I have spoken to one or two people, one person in particular, who was very hesitant about vaccinating a child for whom she's responsible, really. And she wasn't sure that it was good for kids in elementary school. And of course, here I'm thinking about the kids that I know that we were so grateful to have them vaccinated, and waiting for just one more grandchild to get vaccinated. But it was interesting because all she really needed was some information. And I said, well, my grandchildren are have gotten vaccinated in North Carolina, and she said, well, I don't really, I haven't heard that much about it. So I went and looked up her town, or the town that where this child lives, and found a clinic that had, was especially for kids after school times and Saturdays. And she texted me about a week later and said, thank you. I did take this little guy for a vaccination. And I thought, we could have argued, because she and I are not on the same end of many spectrums. But I thought, I need to do that. I don't know. I know a few adults who have not been vaccinated intentionally, and I, it's hard to figure out how to approach people. But I think we kind of have to, if we meet somebody who definitely has an opinion that we think is not for the public good. We need to discuss it. And I'm not quite sure, I need to take Harriet's course too.
I think what you both said was really powerful. And I mean, what you just described, Susan, I mean, it's a gift of information. It didn't necessarily have to turn into a debate about party politics. It can just be a gift of information, and people can take it or leave it. And the experts I've talked to about how to, because there's anti-vaxxers, but most people are not that. There may be some skepticism there, and there's an opportunity for conversation. And it's, to your point, Harriet, also about a sort of deep listening. It's just uncomfortable. I don't know why we've grown uncomfortable with it, or maybe I'm in my own space and I do a lot of talking and listening, and I don't know, but I think those are really important skills. People undervalue how important that is. And if you're like, okay, I'm going to talk to a person that I don't agree with, it's going to be a little stressful. Okay, take a deep breath and go ahead and do it, right?
Yeah, I think people, if you really think back in your life when you have been listened to and just let people talk, and it's usually on a one-on-one basis. It can't be in groups, because you're always going to find the person that you feel closest to, and you'll go with them, and you form your little tribe. But when you're one-on-one, to be listened to is a real gift. And what you've done, Scott, is, you're doing it by asking us questions and listening to us too. So your whole work is part of this process. And
I appreciate
that's how we come together, by people
appreciate
like
that.
you too.
Well, we probably should wrap up. There's one little thing I wanted to get to. It's actually come up a couple times, but you both read a lot. In fact, you're the easiest people to buy for at the holiday time, because I don't ever have to worry, like, what game are they into? What technology are they into? It's like, no, it's a book. It's an old technology and it works.
You're good at that.
So what's one thing you've read in the pandemic that you think other people should read? Susan?
Golly, one.
What is a thing you've read in the pandemic, even if it's an old thing you read again, that you think people would be interested in?
I read some books from COVID calls. Year of the Nurse. I read a couple of Kendi books. I read his big book, Stamped from the Beginning, and How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I tend to read more nonfiction, but I did read the book about Philadelphia, Long Bright River, which is fiction. And I am reading now Eat the Buddha. Barbara Demick wrote the book about North Korea X number of years ago that I read then.
Right.
Year of the Nurse, and the poet you had on. Oh my gosh! Well, I know you. No, Kathleen Ossip.
Oh,
well,
she's amazing. Yeah. Oh, you got her book.
Cool. I actually got this one. Although I want her new one too. I do love Billy Collins. He is such a hoot. And Kathleen Ossip wrote a poem which I actually she writes pretty short pieces. Some of them are longer anyway. But this one was one of the best things I've heard in a while, and John and I just laughed over it. It's marriage. I think the title is something like Marriage During the Pandemic. And it's very short. So here it goes. So much for the fighting and the sex. I want to be alone with you in the next room.
That's fantastic. That's good. She was a great guest and talked a lot about how she dealt with her writing process during the pandemic. Also love, Susan, that you seem to be surrounded by books presently. That's amazing. And I appreciate that. Harriet?
I'm sorry, Scott, I didn't go and read all my books, and I'm kind of one of these people that read all the time, and I kind of get books mixed up and the titles and the authors. And so, I did the Nurse just recently that you gave us for Christmas, which was excellent. But I have been reading a lot of poetry during the pandemic, which I never used to do, but I think it slowed me down, got me out in nature. Mary Oliver is currently my favorite.
Great.
And I read it through the grief process that I had to go through. I read a lot of Jan Richardson, and she really spoke deeply to me about that. So, those things. And I've done a lot of audio books on Libby, which has been great. So I'm always having one of those on. I just listened to Ron Howard's book,
Yeah. Oh, good.
It was fun and good because I lived through those times.
Yeah, sure.
That's what I've been doing.
Well, I've been a little greedy with your time, and we better wrap up. But this has been a great call. Let me just remind everybody that you've been listening to COVID Calls, and you can usually catch COVID Calls live at 7 p.m. Eastern Time weekdays. Although these days we're kind of going around the clock, and we will literally be going around the clock with 2 full days of COVID Calls, which will start on Tuesday. And I'll give you full information about that coming soon if you follow at USF Disaster, and we'll be announcing that full lineup of guests, some of whom we've had on COVID Calls before, including Ed Yong and Greg Gonsalves and others who we have not had on before. So please do stay tuned for that. And let me just take a moment here to thank Susan Merling and Harriet Knowles. First of all, just thank you in general. And I love you both. And thanks for this time. This was a great call, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
We love you, Scott.
Scott, this was great.
Stay healthy, everyone, and we'll see you next time on COVID Calls.